Right, good. Okay, we're going to start in chronological order. So we'll begin with Seymour Reich. Seymour, after the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust, it became clear to much of the world that there needed to be an international treaty against genocide. The United Nations passed the Genocide Convention in 1948, and B'nai began a decades-long campaign to have it ratified by the United States. Much of that effort was led by our colleague and mutual friend, the late Dr. William Corey, who many of you knew. I know, Seymour, this was an important cause to you, and you devoted much of your time to it becoming U.S. law. Finally, in 1986, shortly after your election, the Senate ratified the convention, and 2 years later, after both houses had approved it, genocide became a crime under United States law. Seymour, take us back to those discussions and tell us a little about why it was so difficult to pass in Congress and how you and Bill Corey finally convinced members of Congress to ratify the convention.
Well, Bill Corey really was a great protagonist, and a lot of us miss him. He was the author and the Soviet Cage, was expert on Soviet Jewry and recognized all over the world in that capacity, to the honor and credit of B'nai B'rith. But genocide was a treaty that many of us believed the United States should get behind. And while the president supported that, it was difficult to get ratification by the Congress. The conservative movement in the United States opposed it. Many senators thought that it would impact upon the United States itself, that American citizens, because of racism that existed elsewhere in the United States, that the genocide treaty would bring into United States law, international law. And we had to convince them that was not the case. And B'nai B'rith was active in pursuing, through our membership, the members of Congress, to convince them, and members of the Senate. And happily, ultimately, the Senate did pass the treaty, it became law, and I was privileged to be at the White House when President Reagan signed that bill into law, and it was quite a monumental feat for B'nai B'rith, for which I'm very proud.
During your term as president, you also served as chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, simultaneously representing us and chairing the umbrella group of organizations. This is really, we'll try this. Undoubtedly, one of the high points of your term had to be when you convened the Prime Minister's Conference on Jewish Solidarity with Israel in Jerusalem. It was a symbolic and riveting picture, and many of you have seen this picture, to see you raising your hands together with Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir and Vice Premier Shimon Peres in front of the Western Wall. Would you share some of your recollections with us?
Well, first, I was privileged to be elected as chairman of the Conference of Presidents, which is a major umbrella organization for all Jewish, a major organization in the United States. I might say, you can't hear me?
Yeah, now it is.
Do what?
There you go.
So I was privileged to be elected to that position. I might say that B'nai B'rith, of all the organizations, had the most past presidents who served in that capacity. Label Katz, his name was mentioned before, from New Orleans, Phil Klutznick from Chicago, Bill Wexler from Atlanta, and Bill Wexler ultimately made Aliyah and lived and died in Israel, where he raised his family. But I was chairman of the conference. There was a solidarity rally in Israel. All Jews from all over the diaspora and the world gathered together, and the culmination was a meeting at the wall in the evening, lit up, the wall in the background, and I was asked to give the closing address. It was a unity government. There was Prime Minister Shamir, who was about this high, and there was Deputy Prime Minister Peres, who was this high. So at the culmination of the meeting, I got up and I raised their hands, as a prize fighter would, ending a fight and showing the unity of the government. Well, a year later, when I was going out of office, and the Israeli cabinet had a dinner for me, I recounted that story, and I said for the first time that, I had one of those hands was pulling me down, and Shamir blurts out, "It was me. I couldn't reach that high." A side story that very few people know is it wasn't my idea. Ehud Olmert, then a deputy Prime Minister, as I was going up to speak, said to me, "Seymour, why don't you raise their hands as a prize fighter?" And I did. Later, I learned from Ehud, a good friend of mine, that Maxwell, Lord Maxwell of England, who was supposedly a Mossad agent, a financier of England, and was lost, if you remember, on board a ship. No one really knows how he disappeared. It was Maxwell who told Elmer to tell me to raise the hands, but it was a thrilling experience.
And you can see that photograph, which hangs in the president's office at our headquarters on K Street.
You know,
What-
Dan, there was one other aspect of B'nai B'rith relating to Jerusalem that I'd like to relate. We were having our international convention, I think it was '89. I was just the president of B'nai B'rith, and we wanted to build a world center, and we didn't have the full funds. So Ted Collett convinced us to build a pedestrian bridge right by the mall, by the Cinematheque. And it was to be done on a Thursday morning. A Wednesday morning, I was in Israel, and I got a call from the White House that the president wanted to meet with 6 of us, and would I mind coming over, because he was meeting with Gorbachev, and he wanted to talk about Soviet Jewry. So I got on a 1 a.m. flight leaving Israel Thursday morning, landed in Kennedy 6 a.m., went to the White House at 11 a.m., and was back in Israel the next day. In my absence, the bridge was being dedicated, and B'nai B'rith leaders were going to put their hands in the cement. I was one of them, but I wasn't there. So my late wife, Helen, was there, and Helen recounted the story. As she put her hands in the cement, someone pushed her to make more room. I won't tell you who it was. And she pushed right back to make sure that her hands were cemented. So it's just an aspect of what we do in B'nai B'rith and how it is done.
All right, I just want to stretch this another 90 seconds. The scene now switches to back to December of 1988. Things are really happening. There's been glasnost and perestroika in the USSR. There's a real fast train running toward ultimately what became the dissolution of the USSR. B'nai B'rith had never had a lodge inside the Soviet Union. So you led a solidarity mission, B'nai B'rith mission, to Moscow, December 1988. So pick it up.
You were there, I think Tommy was there too, but had difficulty going. My visa application was denied 3 times. I was told it was denied because I listed myself as president of B'nai B'rith. And if I would take that off the application, they would grant it. I wouldn't do it. Ultimately, I think Dan and I met with the ambassador, was it Dobrynin?
Yes.
On the 16th Street at the Soviet Embassy. We met with him, we explained to him what we wanted to do, and ultimately my visa was granted. So we went to Moscow, and we met with Soviet Jews who formed this lodge, this unit in Moscow. But I'll never forget at the end of that meeting, about 4 or 5 men came over to us and said, listen, we'd like to invest. Do you have any ideas that we can invest some money in? And those were the future oligarchs who ultimately became magnates in the Soviet Union and grabbing all of this industry, oil, timber, coal, and they were, I think, initially part of B'nai B'rith, the unit there, but it was an interesting aspect. And you told me you met with them later, and they...
No, they took me actually into the kitchen.
Yeah.
Said the same thing.
Right.
We deal in timber, we deal in fish, we deal in... But fortunately for us, we didn't.
Well, I don't know.
We didn't take the bid.
No, I'm sorry, we didn't invest with them. That would have been a difference.
Well, I'm not so sure.